Right, welcome to Council's Judgment, episode 5. I am your esteemed host, Tyler Woolley, and today we are going to do another fan favorite Highlander set review of the upcoming Outlaws of Thunder Junction. Ye heckin' ha. Sasha and Spencer, how are you guys doing today?
I'm cooking. I'm cooking.
Cowboy Magic, yeehaw. Best wizard always wins. Red deck wins.
Yeah, this is there's lots of meme potential for the elderly statesman here in Victoria with this set, that's for sure. This set's very interesting to me as we've been discussing it a lot in our chat, and my first reaction was like, "Oh man, so much power level. There's going to be 80 good cards for this for Highlander." And then as they kept coming out, and then just with further discussions, I think it's quite a bit more nuanced than that, and probably not quite as high powered, but definitely we've got some bangers and we've got some really good support cards to discuss. What's your like overall big picture thought on this set for Highlander, Spencer?
Well, yeah, I think there was a bunch of kind of cards that came on the first little batch, and I was like, oh, there's a couple good playables here. I think originally I was wondering with the new kicker mechanic, the spree mechanic, that there might be some way to kind of break some of that, but most of them have seemed pretty mid to bad. And yeah, the rest of the Fallout stuff I didn't think was very good either. So yeah, I think it's there's a couple in here, but overall, meh.
And Sasha, I think you and I were on the same page in terms of thinking this was probably a little better than Spencer's giving it credit for. So we'll get to the arguments right away here.
We'll start it up.
All right, so we're going to look at white cards first. Starting off, the very obviously good for Highlander and potentially other formats that we don't discuss is Aven Interrupter. It's a 2/2 flash flying bird at the mana cost of 1 and double white. When it enters the battlefield, exile target spell and it becomes plotted. And spells your opponents cast from graveyards or from exile cost 2 more to cast. Plotted, for those of you that may not know, allows its owner to cast the spell as a sorcery on a later turn without paying its mana cost. So just still cast it. Most of the time, with a lot of the plotted cards, you're going to see more expensive cards being plotted and then cast on a later turn for the caster. Even Interrupter kind of playing an interesting role for white decks and kind of a classic hate bear fashion. Sasha, I'll let you lead on this one, and we've got an interesting dynamic of Sasha being the person that this card will most likely affect, and Spencer being the most likely person to cast it. So let's go with Sasha first, and what are your thoughts from a combo player's perspective on what this card does?
Obviously, this card's really good against combo. I think it might be a little bit overrated in a sense, just by virtue of the fact that, like, if you remove it, and I mean this not in a combo matchup, I mean for mid-range matchups, if you remove it with a removal spell, then the plot cost becomes free. And so I think it loses a lot of its value there and kind of creates this dynamic similar to like the Fiend Hunter style effects or like Skyclave Apparition, where if you remove it, the value that it extracted was relatively little. But it's certainly a hammer against combo, and I do not look forward to fighting against it, regardless of what combo I'm on.
Absolutely, that's good points. That downsides of these types of cards are not generally evaluated correctly, I think, and it can make combo turns actually way easier if they like snipe Underworld Breach or something, and then you just like kill it and get to cast it for free later on. Spencer, what are your thoughts on this as our resident hate bear player?
I think it's okay because it's not a human and it's double white pip. I think like even D&T will look at it and go, meh. Maybe if they're in the market for a mind sensor in that sort of meta, they might pick this up as well. But in like non-other decks, I feel like if you're leaning towards black, you're just gonna probably play the opposition agent and some other graveyard hate. I think you look at the Spellcaller side of this and just think of that as bonus, and you don't think of it as Spellcaller. I think you just think of it as a static graveyard and exile being 2 more to cast and maybe that makes it okay. 2/2 flyer. I don't know. I think it's pretty medium. I think I'll probably try it out, but I'll probably quickly. It'll be like one of my first tape bears that I'd cut in like a white X D&T or Maverick style deck.
Yeah, I think that's where I've mostly landed here. I think, again, if they had like put a human riding on top of the bird and made it a human bird rogue or something, I think it's quite good. It's just having recently been tinkering with red white humans, it would have been great to have an effect like this, even at double white pip, but without relevant creature types, I think it makes these kind of cards quite a bit worse now, just where we're at with the aggression of a lot of the good humans. So next, we have, just kind of as Spencer discussed, we've got Final Showdown, and just the spree mechanic as a whole. I'm not really a fan of the cards that they've put on here. Just Final Showdown, 1 white instant with spree. All creatures lose all abilities till end of turn for +1. Then +1, choose a creature you control. It gains indestructible. And +3 white, destroy all creatures. I don't know. It's just a lot of mana on this card. I know it can technically do a lot of things, but I'm not a fan. I don't know what kind of deck I would be playing that would make this good, but what, am I missing anything?
No, this is a card that I've seen discussed a lot on the Discord and in various other circles. I think it is wildly overrated, and anybody thinking this is remotely in the realm of playable is out to lunch. And I think it's important for us to highlight the fact that this is a card that's being discussed. It has a lot of hype around it. I think that has more to do with the fact there's a little red hat in the middle right of it than anything else. This card's not playable in our format in pretty much any deck.
All right, Spencer, what about you on our Final Showdown here?
Yeah, I think all these spree cards are actually pretty meh. So I think this one maybe has some potential, but yeah.
Yeah, I agree. And then we'll just give a resounding no to Fortune Loyal Steed. And another card, I think a lot of these mount or I guess saddled creatures are getting a little bit of hype. There's maybe one that I think is okay. I don't think for the most part the value or the body stats are good enough on most of these to even remotely see play. Flicker effects are not great. Like they have value, but they're usually attached to, again, relevant creature types or just better bodies or better effects.
So I'm actually going to disagree with you on this one in particular. I think that in a deck that is looking to flicker things actively in kind of the mid-range space, I think Fortune does enter the realm of playability, and I think actually has the potential to be quite good. Specifically, I'm thinking of the play pattern of play him on 3 and then resolve like any initiative threat or anything that has a good ETB. Like, I mean, Palace Jailer is a good example. Even though you Monarch twice doesn't do anything, the ability to double exile is very strong. Same thing with like FTK. Those are also cards that clear the way for the Fortune to be able to attack safely. And, I mean, it also gives itself vigilance with the Flicker. The biggest barrier to this card is just that when he attacks, he needs to survive combat. So I think that he has real spots that he'll be good in our format, and there are real decks that will want to play him and will be very happy to play him. It's certainly not something that you're throwing in every deck that incidentally likes Flicker. Like, this is not a card that you're going to put into your Seeker Walk deck, but this is something that goes into like your Mardu Initiative Monarchy deck pretty easily. This is something that you could see play in like certainly a dedicated Blink deck if that enters the realm of playable soon. So I think there are homes for this thing, but we don't need to think about it too hard. There are specific homes. He's a great role player in those, and he won't see play outside of them.
Yeah, fair. I guess I didn't think about I think Mardu specifically, or like Turbo Initiative, there's definitely potentially a home for it. I would just think otherwise it's, I don't know, just too dependent, but maybe I'm just overthinking it. But we'll see where it ends up for our loyal Steed there. Next, we've got, we'll just touch on Collector's Cage. 1 white artifact with Hideaway 5. And tap 1 tap, put a 1/1 counter on target creature you control. Then if you control 3 or more creatures with different powers, you may play the exiled card without paying its mana cost. Spencer, what do you think on this? I'm pretty lukewarm, but I don't know. Am I missing something?
I think Collector's Cage and Matter Weaver are definitely Sasha style cards. I don't I've been fiddling around with like counters decks lately, but yeah, I don't really see this one doing the thing either.
Yeah, I actually think this is a card that I think is a little bit underrated in the sense of playability. I don't necessarily think it's actually like a shoe in for every counters deck. I think there are some that will like it, and I think the ability or the likelihood of triggering Coven, which is really what this activated ability requires, is pretty easy in a lot of decks. And I think being able to just cast your free spell off the Hideaway can certainly make it playable. It's definitely in the more fringe department, but I think it's being overlooked in a lot of contexts. And I could see this card seeing played not just in counters decks, but I could imagine like a Martyr Proc style deck kind of wanting this just because, again, triggering that hideaway is really, really easy. And this is a really, really, really cheap thing that can hide away. And once you do that, you still have this activated ability that you get access to.
The problem with Martyr Proc is like the Augur of Autumn, like the Coven ability is actually kind of hard to get. Like most of your creatures have power 1 or 2.
Definitely could be overrating this, but I think it's something that hasn't been talked about, and I think people should at least give it a look, even if that look just tells them, don't play this.
The one thing I thought was potentially interesting for a card like this, Sasha, would be like in like the BattleBot style decks. It's an artifact, it's fairly cheap, and potentially you can do some like funky stuff with like Enlightened Tutor for Portal to Phyrexia or something, and just like hide it under there. That's obviously like Magical Christmas Landing a little bit, but I think
Yeah, but
it has enough context outside of that as well where it might be decent in a deck like that.
yeah, the point's well made. One of the problems with the artifact shell, and we can talk about this with the other card in a second, is that it has a hard time going wide often. Like conventional affinity and other formats and those kinds of decks, they're really good at going wide because they have a density of zero cost artifacts. You can play 4 Ornithopter, you can play 4 Midnight, you get access to all these other affinity cards. In Highlander, we just don't have the redundancy of those effects. So I think this you're right in saying like this is a card that could go into that shell. The problem with that shell is that it tends to be worse than the other artifact aggro counterparts, the ones that will rely more on 2 drops, and then hard playing 3 drops that really put the hammer down. Things like Master of Ethereum, just as like a construct, or honestly Urza as an aggro card, those sorts of things. Transitioning that a little bit to the next card, which is Oltec Matterweaver, which is 2 and a white for a 2/4 human artificer. With whenever you cast a creature spell, choose one, create a 1/1 colorless artifact creature token, or create a token that's a copy of target artifact token you control. This is the kind of card that would go in that style of deck, where you have a good density of creatures, but then you also have like good density of artifacts to subsidize that. This kind of falls victim to that a problem with that deck, and that's that it doesn't have a strong redundancy of both of just artifact creatures. You don't have a good density of like pure creatures, and you don't necessarily always have a good density of just pure artifacts. So I think this card, it certainly can be very powerful, the ability to play creature spells and then copy your constructs, which is the primary goal of your deck. Certainly high upside. I just ask people to have a look at their actual creature redundancy before including this card.
Yeah, I think these two cards definitely make me want to revisit kind of a more cheaper artifact build and see if it's I agree with you. I don't think the redundancy's there, and just like including cards like Memnite and Ornithopter in your Highlander deck is not where you want to be generally. But I wonder if we've got enough even semi-playables to push them in a direction of being fast enough to actually be considered an aggro deck versus just kind of trying to out mid-range people with constructs. That might be an interesting thing to revisit if we get a couple more payoffs, kind of thing. Moving on to blue, we're gonna talk about Jace Reawakened, the new hot mythic planeswalker coming soon to singles in your area. But 2 blue, you cannot cast the spell during your first, second, or third turns of the game. +1 to draw a card and discard a card, +1 to exile a non-land card with mana value 3 or less from your hand, and it becomes plotted, or -6 until end of turn. Whenever you cast a spell, copy it. You may choose new targets for the copy. Also, 3 loyalty, always relevant. So I will say this is one of my favorite cards in the set. That does not mean I think it's super broken or excellent. I do know I will definitely be trying this in most of my blue shells, and I am very intrigued by this card and look forward to kind of looking at the play patterns that happen with it. And decks like Reanimator shells, blue black mid range, and blue red tempo slash Del. Not even, it's not really a Delver deck anymore, but like a Murktide style deck. And yeah, I'm excited about this card. It probably won't be as good as I think it is. Spencer, what do you think? I'm out to lunch on this one, or do you think this is maybe making the cut in like specifically two color blue decks?
You know, Sarah Avenger templating comes to mind, and I think like on its face value, people thought that card was not very good. But then you realize that like, and you know, particularly in a lot of these blue mid-range decks that are leaning more towards tempo, less towards like the higher end CMC, like a card like this actually is like pretty good because if you can like the play pattern of being able to like play this, which is you know a recurring card advantage or rummaging effect, and some to some extent tempo allows you to keep up counter magic or removal and play this in later turns of the game, which is often in a blue mirror or a combo mirror what you're trying to do. So I think it's actually pretty good. I don't know. I think it'll. I don't know what the home necessarily like it just slots right into, but I definitely think that the uptick of like the blue black red Grixis or like the bug decks that we're seeing, not necessarily the Jeskai ones. But maybe this also just like, slams into like Jeskai and J Green as well. Yeah, I don't know. I think it's good. The more low CMC things that blue gets access to, I think it's good for them.
Yeah, I mean that's where I'm at with it. I just really like being able to cast this on turn 4 and having mana up to defend it, or mana up to counter a counter or something. It's a well designed card. I don't know if there really is ways to cheat it in like you would with Sarah Avenger, but I really like it. Sasha, as someone who you know won't be casting this because it's 2 blue pips and your blue decks have 16 colors in them. What are your thoughts here?
Yeah, in my blue decks that can cast blue, they're not going to be casting this card. I do think that the specifically looting effect is pretty interesting. I think the play patterns of it are, as you said, going to be a lot better than they seem. I think thinking about this with the second +1 in terms of plotting cards from your hand that's not going to come up, I suspect, ever. Those kinds of effects are good when they happen earlier in the game, and the fact that this is gated to turn 4, and the ways to ungate it are few and honestly not worth doing. I think means that it's mostly just a looting card on turn 4 that you can hold up extra mana for. Is that good enough? I'm honestly not sure. In the blue-black mid-range shell, obviously you'll end up in matchups where you have removal spells and you need counter magic, and you have counter magic when you need removal spells. So I could see it being playable there, but outside of those applications, I'm pretty lukewarm on it.
Imagine this play pattern. Maybe like Willie, you play a lot of these tempo kind of decks more than the rest of us, but like to me, like the play pattern of being able to like on turn 4, like no acceleration, you just like hit your 4th line drop and like you play this and like it plots a threat. And then not only are you holding up removal or interaction, but like next turn you get to untap your threats down play, and now you can like cantrip, you can rummage, you know, you can like removal plus hold up counter, you can have double counter. I mean, like I think this play pattern is actually like pretty strong.
Yeah. No, I was thinking with this, like, you can, again, I understand a lot of the time these are magical Christmas land scenarios, but like if you can keep the board clear or win a counter war on an empty board, resolve this card, plot like Monastery Mentor, Ledger Shredder, Ver True Name Nemesis, like even White Plume or something, if you're just like blue white or Jeskai, and then you just get to cast it for free and always win the counter war over it. I think that the +1 is actually really good, and even has patterns like, you know, plotting your ancestral when you're plussing it to get to 6, and then -6ing and doubling your ancestral the turn after. I don't know. I think that's actually quite a relevant ability, and I think it will come up more than you think. But again, it's you still have to defend it. You can't just like depend on that. But I agree. I think that play pattern quite a bit, especially in blue mirrors.
Really interesting card for sure, and good design from what I can see.
All right, moving on to a couple maybe bit players here. And another really interesting one, in my opinion, we'll start with Geralf the Fleshright, kind of a classic blue Talrand type creature. 3 mana, 2/3, 1 blue pip. Whenever you cast a spell during your turn, other than your first spell, create a 2/2 blue-black zombie token. And whenever a zombie enters the battlefield, put a 1/1 counter on it for each other zombie that entered the battlefield under your control this turn. So really looking at a reasonable semblance here of a blue monastery mentor and a card that actually would go really great with Jace. But I don't know. I quite like this card. I don't 100% know where would be at with it in my blue decks right now, because I am kind of favoring like barely playing any 3 drops, period. But what do you think, Sasha? Like, I think this has potential to at least be tried in quite a few decks.
I think it definitely has potential. I think there's two parts of this that are a little bit more awkward comparing it to like Mentor in particular. The first one is that you need to cast your second spell. So a play pattern that often happens with Mentor is honestly just like it becomes your one spell a turn sort of thing.
Yeah.
It's not often that you just like turbo pop off with it and go like Mentor, untap, chain a bunch of instants and sorceries, beat for a ton. That's relatively uncommon. And I think the fact that this card is kind of gated by that is a big deal, because it does incentivize playing all your spells in one turn versus like playing 1 to 2 spells every single turn for the next like 10 turns. That being said, like it's in the right colors already, and if Mentor itself was blue, it'd be a much more playable card, and this card's there. It's also a 2/3, which is not irrelevant in a format that has a lot of shocks kicking around, a lot of unholy heats, burst lightnings, forked bolts, etc. So interesting, worth checking. It's also tough that it only triggers on your turn. Like, that is a big deal, especially when you are playing a deck with counter magic, presumably. So I think this card might be in the realm of overrated, but it's certainly one worth testing. I think that it's just not necessarily fair to compare it to Mentor in the same sort of way.
Yeah, that's totally fair. And this also may have like backup win condition applications for like a high tide deck or something. I don't know if those kind of scenarios would play out at all, but it might. Spencer, do you have any other thoughts on this?
No, I think you guys kind of covered it. I mean, I want this card to be good, but I don't think it'll end up getting the slot.
All right. Archmage's Newt. 1 in a blue. Whenever it deals combat damage to a player, target instant or sorcery card in your graveyard gains flashback until end of turn. The flashback cost is equal to its mana cost, and it gains flashback 0 until end of turn instead if Archmage's Newt is saddled. And the saddle cost is 3. Yeah, I don't know about this one. I personally don't think it's very good. And it's like a very, very bad Dreadhorde Arcanist. But am I missing something here, Spencer?
No, maybe even if the saddle was like 1, the fact that this doesn't have evasion, like if maybe if it had Skulk, it needs some sort of evasion so it actually connects. Like in this format, there's no way this 2/2 is connecting. I don't know.
Yeah, this is definitely, if Geralf was like a 4-man's Mentor, this is a much worse Arcanist. I think instead of Arcanist, which you often seeing play in these kinds of blue-red based tempo decks or like low to the ground tempo decks, I think this card is more a like blue-red aggro card, for lack of a better term. I think this is a card that synergizes pretty well with like bolt effects, for instance, where it can clear the way for the Newt to get in, and then you actually have some aggressive creatures that might be able to saddle it. But yeah, this is definitely a fringe playable card. It's nowhere near Arcanist, but it is certainly the closest card to Arcanist that we've seen in the last like time since this got printed.
And finally, we've got Esoteric Duplicator, an artifact clue at 2 in a blue. And whenever you sacrifice it or another artifact, pay 2. If you do at the beginning of the next end step, create a token. It's a copy of that artifact. Sacrifice it, draw a card for 2. I believe this was Ben Wheeler's spoiler. Am I wrong? But I mean, yeah, and that's kind of perfect. I think this is definitely a card that goes into decks playing Chromatic Star and Chromatic Sphere. I don't think there's much of another application, but it's definitely quite good in the eggs deck. Is there other applications I'm missing, Sasha?
No, this is a I think it's fine in eggs. I'm a historic eggs hater. I don't think that it's that good. And I think this card, I mean, the amount of mana that you need to put in to recursively do this is quite high. Obviously, if you have Tolarian Academy and you're just living in Magical Christmas land, like this card's gonna pop off and it's gonna pop off hard. Um, I'm not really a believer. I think this is mostly just like a 3 mana artifact in a deck that's gonna lose on turn 4.
Hear me out. You can copy Mindslaver with
All
this.
right, that's nice. We're gonna go to the next slide.
Black cards. First one, Insatiable Avarice. It has Spree, so it's probably terrible. 1 black to cast, +2 colorless to search your library for a card, then shuffle, put that card on top, and then +2 black. Target player draws 3 cards and loses 3 life. I don't know if this card is very good. If there was a good mono black deck, I would probably play it in that, but I don't know if this necessarily is getting into combo decks. But I'll let Spencer. I'm gonna let Sasha touch on this one because I don't see you ever casting this card in a million years. Well, I can see Sasha potentially casting it.
Yes. I would cast this in Commander. Uh, good on WotC for printing a strictly better Cruel Tutor in 2024 and having it still be wildly unplayable. This is mostly just a like, I am annoyed as the Doomsday player that they printed a card that both draws cards, requires triple black, and also tutors for something, and is not playable. I think this is an offense. This card's not playable in our format at all. If it was an instant, I think it'd be like maybe fringe playable, and even then it'd be a maybe. The fact that it's 3 mana and sorcery and a top of deck tutor, yeah, this is nothing that you should be including in your deck, pretty much regardless of what combo you're on.
But what if? No, I agree. As I said, I think if there were getting to a critical mass point where mono black is potentially like playable-ish, and I would play that in like a Cabal Coffers mid-range deck or something. But yeah, not very impressive otherwise. And along the same vein, we have Pitiless Carnage, 3 and a black to sacrifice any number of permanents you control and draw that many cards with plot of black 1. A very interesting card. I think there's potential to have some applications on this one. I think a lot of them maybe aren't very good. But Spencer, what do you think on the Carnage here?
Yeah, I kind of echo, like, I don't know. Like, I've gone down the rank, like, endless ranks sort of return sack decks a bunch of times. And most of the time they can't get the synergy online or find the critical pieces to make them really worth it. So I don't see how this one will be any different.
Yeah, like it's very possible again that this is a card that eggs decks would want, and just as a payoff card, it's very good there. But it again requires you to have a setup, have tutored twice kind of thing. But it is good there potentially.
Yeah, I actually think this card could have a home in a Breach combo deck, specifically because of the plot cost. I think this is not a card that you're pretty much ever casting for the 3 and a black cost, but the ability to set up on a prior turn to going off with Breach with the plot, not to really to build Storm, but just to get a large number of cards both into your graveyard but into your hand. That deck often will rely on Lion's Eye Diamond over Black Lotus, and a big reason for that is that it puts more fuel into your graveyard. So I actually think this card has some very real applications in the Breach Storm decks, Lotus or Lotusless. I don't necessarily think it's playable in Doomsday Breach, but I definitely would be interested in playing it and testing it in specifically Lotusless and Lotus Breach. And I think that in those decks, it could have a real home and actually be quite powerful. Because oftentimes you're going off with the intent of you're setting up for that one turn, and this lets you cash in basically your board state for an extra 4 cards in your hand and likely 4 extra cards in your graveyard. And that's a substantial advantage, both in terms of digging for like a piece of interaction to like, oh, I'm going to silence if I didn't have it before, or I'm going to dig for like a redundant piece of the combo, but also just to fill up your graveyard with more chaff. I also think that, as you said, this might have some applications in an eggs deck, but again, those decks kind of suck. So,
Yeah, I think that it is pretty interesting in especially just mentioning like Lotusless breach decks. And I think, if you're kind of all in on LED, this is a very, very, very good card. And again, being able to plot it and just kind of sit around until you're ready to combo is very helpful in matchups where you have time to sit around or to do nothing for 3 mana. That is my only concern, is you are literally doing nothing for 3 mana an okay amount of the time if you plot it. We've got a couple of low to the ground black creatures. Forsaken Miner, 2/2, can't block, and whenever you commit a crime, pay black, return it to the battlefield. You know, we're getting up there. We probably got like 10 black 2/2s for 1 now that are reasonably playable, and this one doesn't even do damage to you. So, you know, I don't think there's really much to say on this one. It's playable in black aggressive decks, and that's about it.
It's notable that it's a 2/2, which I think is a lot better than a 2/1 in our format right now.
Yeah.
But this is one of the better 2-power 1-drops that black has gotten. But there aren't that many decks that are playing a redundancy of those cards right now.
Yeah, exactly. And then Tiny Bones, the Pickpocket, 1/1 Death Touch. Whenever it deals combat damage to a player, cast target non-land permanent card from that player's graveyard with mana of any type. And yeah, I don't think this card's very good, but it's pretty cool. Go in the same decks that Forsaken Miner is potentially going in. So there's definitely a lot of 1 mana options for these kind of decks. Maybe Thoughtseize them and get something sweet, get their Ancestral somehow or something, but I don't know. I don't think there's really anything else going on here, hey?
No.
This is a card that's been talked about in Legacy. I think its applications in Highlander are pretty limited. I think it might be a fringe include in some decks, and it might be good in those ones, but yeah, it's tough to dedicate mana to a 1 mana 1/1. Even if it does have Death Touch, this may just get tagged by like a Forked Bolt, and you're just not going to be super happy with it.
Yeah, for sure. All right. Next, we've got another Spree card, Lively Dirge, 1 and a black, Spree +1. Search your library for a card, put it into your graveyard and shuffle, and +2, return up to 2 creatures with total mana value 4 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. Yeah, I don't know. I'm sure there's applications to this. I don't know, Sasha or Spencer, especially just as a resident combo aficionado, is there instant wins with this? I can't think of any off the top of my head, but is there like ways to construct your deck so if you resolve this card, you win the game on the spot? I don't think there's like Thassa's Oracle implication with this card, but I don't know. It's an interesting card, but I don't think it's necessarily like, I'm just trying to think if there's any way to just win the game, and I don't think there is.
If you could search your library for 2 cards, then you could do like a Pattern Rector kill. But because it's only the 1 card, you'd have to like preload the other thing.
Yeah.
And it'd still be for 5 mana. So I don't know. Kind of difficult. It's close.
I think one of the interesting applications for this card might be in a like black Spellseeker deck, because then it just turns into a like Finale of Devastation for Spellseeker. And notably, if you put in the Entomb effect and the Reanimate effect, your opponent doesn't get a chance to respond, so they can't Endurance in response or Scavenging Ooze. Now, that combo's still gotten by those cards, but I think it's an interesting card for an inclusion in like a black Seeker Walk deck. It's also just a 3 mana Entomb effect, which is probably playable in most Reanimator shells. You see them include Buried Alive some percentage of the time, and this is a Buried Alive that doesn't find as many creatures, but can put in Burial Rites into your bin. Outside of those 2 applications, I don't think there's much. Sometimes the Breachstorm decks will include Entomb effects, but a lot of the times they have to have a really high density of cards in their graveyard to enable them, and 3 mana is actually a lot more than Unmarked Grave at 2, and certainly Entomb/Gamble at 1. So I think it's mostly a Reanimator and a black Seeker Walk card for sure.
Yeah, like I don't mind the black Seeker Walk applications for sure. That's not bad. Next, we've got Harvester of Misery, 3 black, 5/4 menace. When it enters the battlefield, other creatures get -2/-2 until end of turn, and a black and a colorless. To discard it, target creature gets -2/-2 till end of turn. I really like this card. I think I was the only one kind of high on it. I just think that this is something that the Reanimator decks have been kind of missing. It doesn't just rot in your hand. It can help you survive the early game. It can be reanimated against tokens or against goblins, Mardu tokens or Mardu initiatives, and just can really kind of turn the tide while also being something that you can just draw as a, albeit bad removal spell. It's still a removal spell in that spot. What do you think, Spencer? Is this card a playable one in different shells, or am I overrating it?
Yeah, I don't know. This one's tough to evaluate. This is one of those cards that I instantly kind of thought wasn't very good, but then when you brought it up, kind of like thinking of some of like the modality cards and a lot of the mid-range piles right now as being like, early turn they get some value, but then late draws they have when you have more access to more mana, they're good. I think if your meta was super high on needing removal and a potential for a sweeper, maybe this like goes into playable. It's difficult. I don't know.
This definitely feels like this is a card that most Reanimator pilots should have a copy of. It's really techy, but it's, I think, quite strong in a certain meta. I also think it's notable that it's just 5 mana. Like, that is totally castable outside of the 2 mana thing. And I can totally imagine board states where, like, a Reanimator player will intentionally not discard it just to make sure that they can hard cast it and save the reanimation effect for a bigger threat. Cool card, but definitely a quote unquote sideboard card in our format.
Yeah, I disagree in terms of like I will 100% be putting this in Reanimator and into my like blue black kind of mid-range Reanimator light deck, just because I think you're starving for cards that are sweepers that aren't dead. And this card, 5/4 menace for 5 is not spectacular, but it's a lot better than like Toxic Deluge against control. And I think that this card is worthy of that, especially given the infestation of Go Wide in the last few months and how well it's doing.
Yeah, certainly in aggro like ours, I think it's quite powerful.
So red's got some interesting ones for sure. We're going to start off with Slick Shot Show Off. Oh, that's a hard one to say. 1 in a red for a flying haste 1/2, and whenever you cast a non-creature spell, it gets +2/+0 till end of turn, and has plot of 1 and a red. I think the applications for this card are quite easy to spot. Personally, I would think it's an auto include in burn and any sort of prowess kind of spell slinger, multiple color, blue red type shells that you're trying to be aggressive in. And do you think I'm off base, Sasha, or is this like kind of a slam dunk for a couple decks?
I was thinking about it, and of all the cards in the set, I think this might be the one that will see the most play in our format. Both lifetime, but then also just right now. This card is probably just an auto include in my mind for almost every single RDW deck from now until forever. It's certainly the best kind of effect that we've ever gotten at this cost. And certainly I think it's better in the prowess E-shells, but honestly, even if you just trigger this once or twice, it'll be more than good enough. I think this card's great.
Yeah, Spencer, what do you think? This I don't know. I think this is a great card.
Yeah, I think it's pretty good. I think it's like a little overhyped. The fact that it has evasion really helps it, I think, with a mono red deck. I also think that it might be playable in like the blue red or prowess decks. I don't think it's like an auto include in like Jeskai or like
No.
some of the 3-color red piles necessarily, but it does add to like the density of nice like 2 CMC threats that I think a lot of like the Grixis more decks are like looking for. Just they can be able to like they don't just have to draw Murktide. It's like there's like other cards that like maybe like Third Path and cards like this like enable them to have some more Tomb CMC threats because a lot of the times those decks can really stabilize the board and they're winning and they really just need to draw a threat that can like turn the corner really fast. And also this lets them traditionally a lot of the tempo decks their weakest uh part of the mid-range matchups is initiative, and this is another card that can help kind of like play that game, which is, as really difficult for them to deal with.
If this card starts to see play in those kinds of tempo decks, I think that'll be a real credit to this guy's power. In my mind, it's just like an auto include for aggro decks, but if it can even enter, like, I mean, we don't often see Sprite Dragons see play in those decks, honestly, And if this card kind of usurps that spot, I think it'll be a real credit to its power.
Yeah, like I think it's more. I don't think I would play this in. I say Murktide as if like one deck plays Murktide, but like blue red kind of not trying to be super aggressive, trying to be a little more controlling, more tempo-y. I don't know that I would play that there, but I would be much more inclined to make my deck more aggressive and play this card. I think you would play it alongside Sprite Dragon in like a blue-red shell. Just again, more density of similar effects. And I like this card a lot. I'll definitely be trying it out. Next, we've got Cunning Coyote, same mana cost, 1 and a red for a 2/2 haste. When it enters the battlefield, another target creature you control gets +1/+1 and gains haste till end of turn, and has plot of 1 red. Yeah, this is another interesting one. I don't think it's as good as Slickshot Show Off, but I do think there's maybe like red-green monsters potential on this one, or like just again, it's a very good aggressive card in my opinion. But Spencer, like I know obviously you're getting a 0 from creature type here. Otherwise, I'd be super excited to play this in like humans or typal decks. But do you think, despite the creature type, this has the potential to make it into some aggressive red decks?
I'm not sure. Yeah, I don't know. I'm pretty medium on it, honestly. I just don't think it has like the right power toughness creature type. Like it has a bunch of words on it, but I don't think it'll see play.
Moving on, we've got a Goblin. So you see 1 mana, you see Goblin. It's going to be at least semi-playable most of the time. This one has First Strike and Haste, and it's a 1/2. And for 3 mana, you can sacrifice it to draw a card and create a treasure token. I don't think there's much to say on this one. It's a bad Goblin, but it's a Goblin. And potentially some versions of Goblins are going to want to play this, especially if you're kind of going up the chain, playing Muxus, playing some more expensive cards, or you're just wanting to be really low to the ground with your lords and attacking with a first striker. I don't know that this is an auto include in goblins. I would doubt it, but Spencer, what do you think on the lackey?
Yeah, actually, I think it's not including goblins. I think this
Cool.
is kind of what they're looking for. Right now, part of the problems with the goblins lists, they've really had to go deep on the 1-drops. So they're playing a lot of bad 1-drops. And I think depending on your build, there's like more people leaning more towards the combo versions, but they still have a like pretty good density of the lords on 2 and the tricks like the raiders and stuff on 1. So anytime they have a first striker, most goblins obviously have haste, which helps their game plan, their mid-range and aggro game plan. But anytime they have a keyword like haste or menace, it actually makes doing combat math super difficult. Because they can always pump. They tend to play a couple tricks. They usually have a raiders or some sort of onboard trick. This also is a card that helps when they're trying to go for their mana turns. They can set up to like draw cards if there's a board stall, and then add for their big mana turn, which is usually their combo turn. No, I think this is pretty good. It doesn't like necessarily like go into a pile, like a matron recruiter pile, sorry. But I think this is kind of what they're looking for. They really just need more 1-drops that are not terrible.
Yeah, I think that's totally fair. And yeah, I was looking for a secondary opinion. Sasha, I'm assuming you're going to back one of us here, but just maybe chime in if you think this is an auto include or not.
I'm definitely more with Spencer. I think its application, like 6 mana is obviously a lot in the Goblins deck. But the fact that it can set up if this is in play and you have 6 mana and have Recruiter in your hand, you don't just get to play Recruiter. You get to draw into your pile, play the Snoop, and then kill with the Snoop. So I think that that's very powerful in its applications. And yeah, it's 1/2 with First Strike and Haste and Goblins is playable. And it's certainly, given the bad cards that it includes, I'd be quite happy to register this always.
Nice. Yeah, I actually didn't think about that recruiter pile application, and I think that will come up a reasonable amount of the time. So
It's
yeah,
also
all right.
annoyingly an X2.
Yes.
I've been playing Plague Engineer lately and getting goblins left and right. And this is one of the goblins. I'm like, damn it.
All right, we've got Legion Extruder, a 1 red artifact. When it comes into the battlefield, it deals 2 to any target, tap 2 sacrifice another artifact, create a 3/3 golem artifact creature token. Yeah. Sasha, what do you I'm kind of not sure what I think. I don't think this is very good, but is it like a artifact like battle bots type thing where this makes the cut?
This is a good card for all the welder-based artifact decks. And not just in the sense of it actually, unlike a lot of the cards that can go into that deck, where they're kind of just value engines, this is a value engine that can impact the board, not just in terms of like creating creatures opposed to accruing value, but it does it just by doing 2 damage. I think this card is like, if you have registered Goblin Recruiter, you're almost required to register this card as well. Now, you can talk about the applications of Wilder more broadly, about the issues with that deck. But I think that this doesn't just fit into that shell well. I think it addresses one of the key weaknesses of that deck, which is having a way to both spin your wheels, sack artifacts, accrue value that way. But it also provides a board state from that, and it also directly answers something when it comes into play. So I'm a really big fan of this card in that very specific shell.
I look forward to you casting that against me and then immediately winning the game. Me winning the game because you're casting that card. To be clear.
No, I got it.
All right, on to green. First, we've got our bristly boy, bristly build, spine sower. 2/2 for 1 and a green with landfall. Whenever a land enters the battlefield, put a 1/1 counter on target creature. And then 3 green, double the amount of 1/1 counters on each creature you control. I think the applications here are very obvious in terms of kind of counters, 4-color, 3-color, 5-color, whatever kind of counters, hardened scales decks out there. I think on rate this, and taking into consideration the 2-drop situation in monsters, I think this probably makes the cut in just like green-red monsters. I think this card's really good. What do you think, Sasha? We'll go to you first here.
I'm pretty much on board with that. Obviously, it's quite good in any sort of like Naya counters deck. But I think it could see play in the monsters shells too. The one thing I'd worried about is just it's a 2/2 when it comes into play, so it's obviously vulnerable the first turn. But I think it does, the fact that it can put its counters on other creatures too is really very real. I definitely want to try it in monsters to at least see where it stands. But yeah, this is an auto include for counters.
Spencer, what do you think about this in like green X aggro?
I mean, like, I think we all saw how Luminarch Aspirant definitely was at first kind of looked at as like a medium card, and then as time goes on, people have caught on to how powerful like those effects and like the Siege Veteran is. So I think this is a card that definitely goes in like the green, maybe white X that are kind of trying to do that. I think it's pretty good. I don't think it actually is super good in monsters. That deck already has a lot of 2-drops that has choices to play that are red that it doesn't play that are like either hasty or card advantage-y. But I think this maybe sees more in like the green white kind of more mid-range piles, counter synergies, maybe green X mid-range. I think like the lands decks get to play this as like another like interesting kind of combo. I mean, if you're playing any sort of like fast bond style deck, I feel like this is like another way you can be like do a sneaky kill, you know?
Yeah, that's a cool application for sure. Yeah. It's also very notably, I mean, obviously, but it's very easy to green Sun Zenith for this card and then have a fetch land and immediately get 2/1 counters. Yeah, I think this card's one of the better cards. I like it a lot. I'll be trying it in any green attacking deck. Next, we've got Ornery Tumblewag, 2 and a green, 2/2. At the beginning of combat, put a 1/1 counter on target creature. Whenever it attacks while saddled, double the number of 1/1 counters on target creature with saddle 2. Yeah, I don't know. I think probably more so this maybe is a counters only card. I don't know. What do you? Is this more likely to see play in like monsters or something, or am I missing something, Spencer? What do you think on the Brushwag?
I mean, a lot of them are cutting Court to Garenbrig now because it's like a little bit too slow. Doesn't have haste. This is another card that I think like in the monster shells, it's not really doing what they really want to do, I would say. Having said that, I think that it is quite good in like once again like a counter synergy deck that's trying to be aggressive. That is like looking to like have synergy with like Court of Garenbrig and other counters. So I definitely think this card's something to watch. It's difficult to evaluate. I misevaluated like cards like Siege Veteran long ago. So I don't know. These sorts of cards I always initially think are like pretty bad, but then people start playing them and get enough synergy on board that they're worth it. Notably this one I think takes a little bit too long to set up, but I think you'd rather just play like Sentinel of the Nameless City or whatever it's called, and you have an instant like beater and some card
Yeah.
value as well.
Yeah, I think just the notable difference between 2 and 3 mana is really big. Like 3 mana is kind of where the bombs start to come in our format a lot of the time, and so you really are competing with a lot of cards at 3. Sasha, do you think this is beating out good 3-drops at this point in some of those shells, or?
So obviously it's really good in counters. We don't need to talk about that. I actually think it might be not necessarily better than Sentinels of the Nameless City, but I certainly, you talked about Court of Garenbrig. One of the problems with that is that it doesn't do anything the turn it comes into play, but it also, because of that, and the fact that it establishes the monarchy, it kind of gives your opponent the monarchy for free. I think there are decks that will be cutting Court of Garenbrig, but will be including this card. The fact that the turn that it gets to attack, it can be a base level 4/4, and potentially one that just put its counters on something else. So you get modality in that. But also, if you just play a 2-drop to follow it up, it attacks as a 6/6 the first turn, and then way bigger the following turns. I think this card is like slept on, and I'd even go so far as to say like it is better than Siege Veteran in those sorts of decks. Like if you were playing a like green white deck that maybe was on Siege Veteran, this card should usurp that spot easily, and it's not particularly close.
All right. Well, I'm a sucker for 2-color any kind of deck, so maybe I'll put that in the old pre-order pile. So we'll quickly run through a few more green cards here. We've got Aloe Alchemist, 2 mana 3/2 with Trample and Plot of 1 and a green. When it becomes plotted, target creature gets +3/+2 and gains Trample until end of turn. I like this card, again, kind of in those 2-color, maybe even Naya aggro decks. I think it's quite playable and quite good. I don't know. What do you think, Sasha?
This is a neat card for green-red pump spells, green-red
Yeah.
Sly. Outside of that, I don't see it seeing play.
Okay, fair enough. Spencer, what do you think?
I agree. I don't think it's maybe has some like borderline application. I just don't see it.
Interesting. Yeah, I think maybe I tend to overrate 2-drops. I'm always struggling with 2-drops and wanting more of them that have 3 power with some other applications. So it kind of maybe fills a niche in my mind that maybe doesn't actually exist. So next we got Bristlebud Farmer, 2 green for a 5/5 trampler. When it enters the battlefield, create 2 food tokens. When it attacks, you may sacrifice a food, mill 3 cards, and put a permanent from among them into your hand. It is hysterical to my old brain that this is like maybe not playable, because back in my day we cast Urnam Djinn and we liked it for 4 mana, and now we get like 19 abilities and it's like, oh yeah, this will see niche play. It just boggles my mind. But is there like like synergy applications, do you think? Like if you're playing food decks or something, obviously this is very good, but
Yeah,
I don't
there
know.
isn't the food like the food synergy decks are really not playable in our format. They're mostly decks that have food as kind of incidental artifact count, and putting green cost cards into that deck is very difficult. If this was 3 and a green, I'd be a lot higher on it for those decks. I'm pretty medium on this card. I think it's neat. It's not the most wildly playable card ever.
Yeah, I don't see it. I agree with you being like, oh wow, this like 5/5 trample with a bunch of text, potentially drawing cards on rate seems like really good, but it's missing some of the critical keyboards, and the food cardboard, unlike I'd say, clues or maps, like the food doesn't really count as like a half or a third of a card at all, so it's not really generating a ton of advantage on this board. And its keyword trample has actually lost its power, and now I think that vigilance is like pretty up there. Vigilance and first strike are like the keywords I'm looking for if it's not evasion.
Give this card this. It's real good in the Green Red Monsters mirrors. I will block your questing beast until Kingdom Come, and I'll gain life with my food.
Yeah, like if if you're in monsters and you're infested with red deck wins or something, then where the 2 food tokens is like half a card or something, just being able to gain 6 life, great. But yeah,
Pretty mid,
somehow,
and you're already favored in those matchups.
yeah, it's like somehow this is not a playable card, and that just boggles my mind. Anyway, moving on to Sandstorm Salvager, 2 and a green for a 1/1. Yikes. When Sandstorm Salvager enters the battlefield, create a 3/3 colorless golem artifact creature token, and tap 2 put a 1/1 counter on each creature token you control to gain trample till end of turn. Well, that took a turn from 3 mana 1/1, that's for sure. Yeah, I mean, another tokens card that seems pretty powerful to me. And they're really kind of pushing these +1/+1 counters in this set for sure. This has got to make the cut in those decks, and maybe like in Karnstruck decks too. Hey, Sasha?
So most of the Construct decks I played don't play Blade Splicer. Um, I did say that like of the green decks that do include artifacts, usually you can only cast one green pip. This is that. I'm pretty medium on this card. At this point, we're actually reaching a redundancy where there may be a like kind of synergy, like aggro mid-range Bant shell that tries to use like Wargate and like Blade Splicer in this card to try to generate a board state off of that. I'm not sure. It would require some brewing to figure out. And generally, this card I think is kind of medium. If you're playing a regular tokens deck and you have green, I think it might be interesting there. But yeah, I think this card's pretty mopey.
Fair. Spencer, what do you think?
Yeah, I don't think this is playable outside of some weird synergy thing.
Huh, interesting. All right. Well, I'm willing to be wrong. I would definitely give it a shot in my green battle bots decks. Just pumping the team for minimal cost seems kind of sweet, but who knows? Lastly, we've got Vaultborn Tyrant, 5 green, 6/6 trample. Whenever Vaultborn Tyrant or another creature with power 4 or greater enters the battlefield under your control, gain 3 life and draw a card. When it dies, if it's not a token, create a token that's a copy of it, except it's an artifact in addition to its other types. I think Sasha's kind of noted here, this is a dinosaur. So if you're playing a Savage Order type of deck, which I've been kind of memeing into in the last little while, trying to see if I can get it to work. This is notably a very powerful dinosaur. I don't know. I don't think there's really anything else to talk about. I don't think you're playing this in like a normal hoof deck or monsters or anything at 7 mana, but it's there if you're trying, like me, to construct a dinosaur monsters type shell. We've also got Omen Path Journey. You forgot to put the cope on the landslide this time, Sasha. I'm very disappointed.
Oh, I don't think there's quite as much cope this time.
That's true. So when it enters the battlefield, search your library for up to 5 land cards that have different names, exile them, and shuffle. At the beginning of your end step, choose a card at random exiled with Omen Path Journey and put it into the battlefield tapped. This is a very interesting card, and I definitely, when Sasha and I were speaking on it the first time, missed the up to 5 lands and kind of thought it was trash. But being able to just immediately put Glacial Chasm, Field of the Dead, a missing combo piece land into play for 4 mana, or setting up a 2-card pile with Thespian Stage Dark Depths, just does have quite a lot of power behind this card. And we have been seeing pretty big uptick in lands deck, both locally and just browsing through other metagames. And I think this is exactly the kind of card that they're going to want. What do you think, Sasha?
Yeah, this is definitely a like slow, like 5-color combo lands style card. I think it's mostly going to be a Glacial Chasm card or like a slower Dark Depths included. But it is cool that you can like you have modality in that. It's not just hard capped at being like a Reap and Sow for Glacial Chasm. It can also be like I'm going to get Dark Depths Thespian Stage and kill you in 2 turns. That's quite good. 2 turns. Yeah, 2 subsequent turns. You can also just get like the requisite number of lands plus Field of the Dead, and then you've kind of set up a inevitability for your game plan if you've established Glacial Chasm into play already. So really cool card, but I do think it's gated to specifically those like slower combo lands, Glacial Chasm centric decks.
Spencer, do you agree? I don't know. I would probably just play it in almost any deck that I'm playing Stage Depths in. Like I think I would probably play it in. I've put Stage Depths back into Hoof, and I think I would maybe try this out there with a floor of grabbing Gaia's Cradle and putting it into play. Yeah, I don't know. I like this card. And do you think it has more than just like slow combo lands application, Spencer, or just kind of playing it in those shells?
Yeah, I mean, I've been off Dark Depths and Hoof for like years. I just think that the price of the colorless lands is already too much when you're playing Nykthos and Gaia's Cradle for your turn one green source. It just leads to so many mulligans, but that's a whole other decision. I think Omnipot's Journey is a super cope card. I don't know. I don't think it's very good. I think that 4 mana Find Glacial Chasm is like the best application of it. Maybe the odd time it has like a slow find everything else, but Realms Uncharted is already like pretty bad, and a lot of lands players play it, and they always like make a 4 land pile, and it's pretty medium. And I know it's not the same, but I'm just saying being able to tutor for a couple different lands that are like gonna slowly gain value with like Echoing Deeps and like Glacial Chasms and stuff like that, it's just a little bit too slow. And I think if this is 3 mana, I think it'd be a different discussion. But on 4, I think the land stacks are just they're often like either if they're not hard comboing or trying to hard combo by then, they're trying to play a mana denial plan, and then when they're playing a mana denial plan, they're often only functioning on 1 to 2 CMC to be able to cast. So I think it's gonna be pretty tough.
All right, moving on. So yeah, we've got a number of interesting multicolored cards. We can kind of talk about all of these first 3 at the same time. We've got Lila, Undefeated Slickshot, Malcolm the Eyes, and Slick Sequence. Lila, a 3 mana 3/3 with prowess, and whenever you cast a multicolored instant or sorcery spell from your hand, exile it instead of putting it into your graveyard as it resolves, and it becomes plotted. Malcolm, 2/2 flying haste, and whenever you cast your second spell each turn, investigate. And Slick Sequence. Slick Sequence is a blue-red instant for dealing 2 damage to any target, and if you cast another spell this turn, draw a card. I think if you're playing any of these cards, they will probably all be appearing in your blue-red spells deck, slanted more towards aggro implications against instead of like more of like a longer game or control plan. I think these cards are definitely all playable. I'm less sure on Lila, but that's a lot of words and potentially a lot of value. What do you think about these decks for like a blue-red Spellslinger deck, Sasha?
I definitely think Malcolm and Slick Sequence for like I think blue-red deck wins. I think that those 2 cards are definitely ones that you'd be interested in including. I'm a little bit more reticent on Lila, just because I don't think there's a good redundancy of multicolored instants or sorceries in that deck. Like, off the top of my head, it's literally 6 Sequence, and even including Electrolyze in that style of deck would be kind of sus. I do want to highlight how Slick Sequence, I think, might get overrated in shells that are not that, like think Just Sky sort of decks or like Rug Tempo. I think it's not playable in those decks. I think you really do have to be trying to cast this card as just like 2 mana, draw a card, but that 2 damage is going to your opponent's face more often than not.
Yeah, that's kind of why I highlighted. Like, I think these are mostly unplayable outside of one deck, but they're notably 3 cards from the same set that make that one deck better potentially. Do you think these all make the cut in like a more aggressive slanted Is It deck, Spencer?
Yeah, I mean, I think of them, Malcolm the Eyes stands out. Like, I do think when you always have a keen eye on these kind of decks looking for 2 drops, and lately I've been also thinking about that. This one seems like it could be good. I think you have to have a sub theme synergy there, but flying haste, it's usually pretty okay. It's got a good body there. Lila, it's hard for me to evaluate Lila. It's just a lot of words. It's got prowess, but 3 CMC in those decks, a little bit tough. Slick Sequence. I've things like Prismari Command and Flame of Anor, a lot of these blue-red incidental value cards often end up being better than I think they will be. So Slick Sequence is a card that I'm like, oh, potentially it can be a nice little 2-for-1 in those decks. So yeah, I think so. I think so.
I think you will, Sasha, miss that Lila spectacular with Manamorphose, just like every other card in Magic history.
I can't wait to play it in my Commander Storm deck. Speaking of cards that belong to Commander.
Yeah. So a couple more multis here. as we are finishing up. We've got Simulation Aid. I don't know. Is it Aegis or Aegis?
I think it's
I get
Aegis.
think so too.
Aegis, yeah. One white blue equipment. I'm already not paying attention. When it enters the battlefield, exile up to one target creature until Assimilation Aegis leaves the battlefield. When it becomes attached to a creature, for as long as it remains attached to it, that creature becomes a copy of a creature card exiled with Assimilation Aegis equipped to. Yeah, I don't know.
Look, we got Icecrown Scepter for creatures at home.
This is just like the meme of I ain't reading all that, I'm sorry, or I'm happy for you.
Yeah, this is kind of a sus and include for the like blue-white X or just straight blue-white artifact decks, just as a way to get into the removal spell, which is one of the things those decks really want and honestly really lack. And it's
I guess you can Stoneforge for a removal spell.
yeah, or Steel
So,
Shaper's Gift.
yeah, okay.
And
Yeah,
those decks
fine.
increasingly want to play blue because of Cryptic Coat, which it turns out is quite a good card in the format. So I think it will see play. It's not a crazy good card, but I think it will end up seeing more play than people expect.
That's fair. Yeah, I guess being able to Stoneforge or Steel Shaper's Gift for a removal spell actually makes this relevant. I take my bitey quip back.
If you're in like a blue-white Stoneblade deck, like maybe this, and you're wanting to do that kind of thing, I think like this might be something you look towards if you're like looking for a couple more removal spells. But yeah.
I think it's just magical Christmas land that it does much more than that.
Yeah,
But-
I think you're expecting this to be like an O-ring with an artifact staple, or a worth O-ring, but it's stapled onto an artifact versus
Yeah.
equipment.
Yeah, exactly.
It'll always be bad.
But sometimes it'll be bad and tutorable. The best combo. So next we got Seraphic Steed, green white 2/2, first strike, lifelink. Whenever it attacks while saddled, create a 3/3 white angel token with flying, saddle 4. Somewhere green white little kid players all got a little tingly feeling.
I didn't, and I'm a green-white little kid player.
No, you're a green white martyr proc player. There's a difference.
Yeah, listen, in that deck, I mean, play this guy, play a smiter, bada bing, bada boom.
Yeah. If it was not settle 4, I actually think this would be good.
Yeah, if this
Maybe
was settled,
maybe
if
not.
this was settled 3 where like the angel could settle it in next combat, I think it'd be insane.
Yeah, it may like I don't know what the saddle number would have to be for this to be good. Maybe 2, but definitely not 4. If it's settle 2, I think like you're like maybe pretty okay, you know.
I do think for the like we're saying green white little kid decks kind of with a bit of meme intention there. This card will like there are very few 2-mana cards in our format that can straight up win the game off of value that they accrue alone. Now, obviously, this requires prerequisites. It's not alone. You just need you need another 4 power, and you need to be able to attack with this guy. But its base rate of just being like a 2-mana 2/2 with first strike and lifelink isn't the worst thing on the face of the planet. So I do think that it's like interesting in certain decks. And I think it's something you should be aware of. But it's not a crazy powerful card by any stretch of the imagination.
Yeah, once again, it's a 2-drop. If I'm playing specifically a green white monsters shell, I would consider it. I would not consider it anywhere else. Next, we've got Marchesa, Dealer of Death, blue, black, red, 3/4. When you commit a crime, you may pay 1. If you do, look at the top 2 cards of your library, put one of them into your hand and the other into your graveyard. Targeting opponents, anything they control, and or cards in their graveyards is a crime. I kind of like this card. I don't know if it's good enough in like Grixis Tempo, Grixis Murktide kind of decks, but I would definitely try it. 3/4 is a nice number for 3 mana, block, and then providing you with additional cards and additional graveyard fodder for your delve spells and for like stuff like Unholy Heat, etc. I don't know. I think this is interesting. It'll definitely take playing with it a bit to know if it's good enough. But Spencer, do you think this is worth trying out?
I mean, Grixis is not really the color wedge that I've experimented with very much, so it's hard to evaluate 3 CMC within that. My initial impulse instinct is to say no, but of the color combos that can maybe abuse crime, I say like this is maybe it. Whether or not that's worth it, I don't know.
I definitely think this is a card that belongs in like a Grixis mid-range Grixis tempo deck. And honestly, just playing like a 3-mana 3/4 in those colors is not the worst thing ever. Like This thing blocks pretty well, and committing a crime in those colors is so easy. Like the play pattern of just play Marchesa on 3, untap, and have like 2 removal spells, or like hand attack plus so 1 mana removal spell to like trigger this double better sleight of hand twice, is really powerful as a play pattern. So I think it's underrated, and I think it is certainly worth looking at in those decks. Placement of those decks in the meta on the whole, I think, is a bigger discussion, but I think it's interesting, and I actually think I'm likely to register this card at some point in the future.
More multicolored goodness. We've got the Gitrog, Ravenous Ride, 3 black-green, 6/5, trample, haste. When it deals combat damage to a player, sacrifice a creature that's saddled at this turn. If you do, draw X cards and put X land cards from your hand onto the battlefield tap, where X is a sacrifice creature power. Saddle 1. That's a lot of text.
It's clearly the art in the background. You can see it looks like a Cathar's Crusade. Thalia is a Cathar. So I'm just saying, once again, Gitrog and Thalia together again.
Confirmed.
Yeah, I don't know. This is a lot of words, and it's a lot of words that don't necessarily suck. I don't know. It's like,
this is a cool dragon.
Yeah, like I think like if you're in like Jund, or like if the Rock is playable at any point, like I actually think this card's quite good. Maybe I'm wrong. It's like, obviously got to take mana cost into consideration, but I would definitely try this out as a finisher slot in a deck that can cast.
Yeah, I think this is a interesting card. I can't think of what shell it would go into outside of like the, I don't know, like 2017 era, like Jund lands decks. There are applications, I think, where you'll want to, like, if you are a Jund lands value-ish style deck, where you will actively want to tutor for this card over like Titania, just because of the value it accrues and the fact that it can attack with haste, and that's something that a deck generally doesn't have access to. Figuring out the shell that wants to play it, I think it'll be tough, and I don't think it justifies creating a new shell around it.
Yeah, it's possible. I just think that in a deck like even Jund Monsters, Jund Midrange, having like a zenithable haste threat is actually a pretty big deal. Like there's not a ton of decent, even like more expensive zenith targets that have haste and trample, especially. So I think this is a very good card. I like it. Spencer, are you going to be zenithing for Frog on a Log anytime soon?
Probably never.
Well, I can't wait to beat you over the head with this. It'll be great.
It's the kind of card I lose to, but like I would never play.
If he loses, he'll have to be committed to a mental asylum.
Next, we've got Honest Rotstein, 1 black green, 3/2. When it enters the battlefield, return target creature card from your graveyard to your hand. Creature spells you cost 1 less to cast. That is a lot of very interesting words, and a very aggressively costed Gravedigger, and one that is aggressively costed and enough words that I do think this is playable in certain decks. Also notably, even though it's colors that doesn't necessarily matter, this is a human, which is always something to look out for. Spencer, we'll go to you first. What do you think of old Honest Abe here?
I don't think it's very good. I mean, like right now, a lot of the creature combos, if you're looking for like a Time Walk combo, whatever variation of Seeker Walk, it is mana hungry, so maybe on like the face value it seems like kind of okay, but it's not mana hungry for colorless mana. It's mana hungry for specifically pipped mana, for blue and green, and white. So you're already in your off color to cast this. The turn you're going off, usually you actually want and if it's a non-seeker deck, the turn you're going off, usually you actually want the Eternal Witness specifically effect, or you want it to put a card into play. So if it's an Eternal Witness effect, it's usually to get back a Chord or a Tutor because you've done some sort of Devoted Druid combo or something like that in those types of decks, or it's because you need a sack outlet for like those types of decks. So I don't know. I just don't see how this is good. But you know, maybe I could be wrong. I'll end up slotting this into a couple decks that I'm fiddling with right now, just to try it out, and then I'll take it out probably immediately. I think if it's power and toughness are switched, also that might help. Or if it was a 1/4, it might be better.
Yeah, Sasha, what do you think on the Ret Stain here?
I definitely agree with Spencer. Like, I think its applications are mostly going to be in Seeker Walk, if anywhere. And that's specifically because of not necessarily the Gravedigger effect. That's kind of like a you'll accept it and it'll be better than it normally would be in those shells. But just making your creature spells cost one less means that the critical mana value will be one lower, though the pip density is often the barrier in those combo decks. So we'll see. It's a maybe include in like 4-color Seeker Walk with black.
Fair enough. Ruthless Lawbringer is another aggressively costed, interesting card. 1 white black for a 3/2. When it enters the battlefield, you may sacrifice another creature. When you do, destroy target non-land permanent. I really wish this card was a human. I think it'd be really, really good if it was a human. And probably due to the colors it's in, not gonna see a whole lot of play. But I don't know, Sasha, like maybe like
This is the
like
best version of this effect that we've gotten,
yeah.
and I don't think the effect is remotely in the realm of playable anymore.
Yeah, like I think it's playable in non-tiered decks. Like, like if you're playing like Mardu Goblin Bombardment, this card's probably spectacular. Like just like sacrifice sort of decks, but those haven't been around very much lately. They've kind of moved off of that into like
They've also
counters shells.
they've also moved towards being more aggressive decks with like
Yeah,
gutting broadside and like having other applications. So this style of card is just like really fallen out of favor as a way to like games are not decided by the ability to like I'm going to exchange my like one shitty piece of cardboard that'll get sacked, but it's mostly still there to like deal with your best threat. Like games are really grinded out in that same sort of way anymore. And this is a card that
yeah,
really does live in that world where the world has moved on.
totally. Yeah. Spencer, anything to add?
Nah.
Fair. Artifacts. We've got Lava Spur Boots. I don't know. This might have gotten switched over from our Commander episode. Uh, equip creature gets +1/+0 and has haste and ward 1. Equip 1. This is actually like it's so cheap and like notably, obviously, you can fetch this with Urza's Saga. And gaining haste off of Urza's Saga is not nothing. This is like much better than Lost Jet, that's for sure. But I don't know that I'll be putting it in like Saga aggressive decks necessarily, but I don't know what do you think this makes the cut in like BattleBots shells or what, Sasha?
Yeah, I think that if you, I'm a famous hater of including cards in your deck for the purpose of tutoring them with Saga. Like the number of Sagas in your deck is equal to the number of like slots you include that are tutorable with Saga. That being said, if you have a like good redundancy of ways to get Saga into play and it's relatively consistent, Louspur Boots does tangibly increase the clock of Saga if it is like your primary source of a clock. Eh, I'm kind of on the fence of whether or not those decks would even play it. So even within that very small niche, I'm not 100% sure, but I think it's something that will require more testing to be fully aware of.
Anything to add, Spencer?
It's trash. I
Yeah,
don't know what else to say. It's so bad.
that's kind of where I landed. I was trying to be nice, but yeah, I don't think this is a playable piece of equipment, but it is still better than Lost Jet, which is
Yeah.
absolute tire fire of a myth. I would be so mad to open this at Mythic Rare if I still like open packs. This card is so bad, and I don't understand how it is a Mythic Rare, other than, of course, that it has Jit in the name.
Yeah, I think that is the only reason why this is on anybody's radar. And sorry to hurt the feelings this time. This card's not even entering the realm of playable.
I like just trying to think of all like the applications for Jit, with primarily just even the untapped land. It's just yeah, I don't think there is actually an application for Lost Jit in the format.
It's also
It's
like they printed a better version of Lost Jit like a set ago in the Fallout with Pip Boy, and that card's still not good.
exactly.
Lands. We've got Fomori Vault, colorless land. 3 tap, discard a card. Look at the top X cards of your library, where X is the number of artifacts you control. Put 1 in your hand and the rest on the bottom. I think this has like very, very, very niche applications, and I'll turn to Sasha as I think those applications are probably more in his wheelhouse than anyone else's.
Yeah, this is a bad Inventors Fair. When I say bad, I mean a really bad Inventors Fair. If you're playing Inventors Fair in your deck, maybe you want to try out Ephemeral Revolt too. But it's not a great card by any stretch. Like, this is maybe a side include. Like, if you have Buried Ruin somewhere in your deck, and somehow that card has like entered your radar and has consistently stayed on your radar, this is something you should be thinking about. Um, Few and far between are the decks that run like Inventor's Fair and Buried Ruin. So, yeah, those are your applications, but it is technically playable in those decks.
Yeah. Is our roundup for Outlaws of Thunder Junction. And yeah, I don't know. I like this set. I think it's got a lot of interesting applications that maybe are not additions to the top tier decks in our format. Most notably, I know this set will definitely have me revisiting blue red and making it into more of an aggressive deck, kind of looking at it from a more prowess shell. I think that's the deck that is gaining the most from this set of cards to either try or cards to make it climb the ranks of playability. Here, you guys have any final thoughts?
I actually think this set was pretty mid. I don't know. The first couple cards got spoiled. I was like, ooh, I think this is gonna be like quite a good one. I think we talked about this beginning of the show. Like I just yeah, and then the rest of it kind of fell out, and it just felt like they kind of like took the teeth out of it. A lot of people are saying it's a push set. I mean, for constructed formats, I think a lot of the cards we talked about even like have like way more applications within like constructed formats, obviously. But in terms of like our format, I didn't really see a bunch where I'm like, oh, this is like a slam dunk staple in every archetype. There's just a couple cards where I was like, oh yeah, that probably gets into like a bunch of decks, but not even like all of them. There's no card where I'm like, oh, I got to go buy that, which is kind of how
Yeah,
I felt with even Karlov. Like at least there's a couple cards where I'm like, oh, I should probably go grab one for when I want to play this deck or one of these archetypes. But in this one, there's not like a oh, if I go to the next tournament and I don't pick this card up, I feel disadvantaged, which like there's been sets that are like that.
Yeah, that's totally fair. I definitely overrated the set based on the first kind of week of previews or spoilers. I do think it's better than Karlov, except notably, I do think I undervalued the Surveil lands and didn't pick up a full set of them when I should have. I think those have been a good addition to the decks that I have added them to now. But yeah, I think interesting set and has more so applications for maybe decks lower on the food chain and helping them out a bit. Sasha,
yeah.
sorry, do you have any final thoughts as well?
Yeah, it's very rare that there's a standard set that comes out that actually has me more excited for its modern brewing applications than the Highlander ones. But this happens to be in that category. There are some interesting cards that are role players. I do think that if you wanted to take a staple out of the deck, it's going to be uh the the best bird wizard that they've now ever printed, the 1 and 2 or haste flying guy. Um,
Yeah,
but yeah, like there isn't anything that's like a standout staple, if you will, from the set. Yeah, some kind of medium cards. I'm personally excited for Bristly Bill and the Bushwag. Just give me some extra counters cards. I want to make that deck a little bit better.
Yeah, I
nice.
mean, like I do think that that card and some of the red card and the blue red cards, I think are the standouts for me. I'd say.
If you are a blue-red
Yeah,
spells player or a counters player, you've actually gotten some real upgrades.
absolutely.
I think counters. I mean, there's so many archetypes that I feel like they just need the density of cards, then the synergy will outperform just the good stuff piles. And counters is a deck that I think not too long from now, some of the synergies will actually start just outperforming the good stuff decks.
Mhm.
Like I actually think like you can play hardened scales in those decks and go off.
Nice. All right. Well, before we go, I'm going to turn the floor over to Spencer here, who's just going to do a little uh, hashtag ad for an upcoming tournament for us.
You like winning duels, like CanLander, like trying to play in a modified Comp REL environment. Hop on down to Yellow Jacket Comics and Games in Victoria, BC, Sunday, April 28th. It's on 11 a.m. $35 entry. Just gonna be doing a little Highlander for a duel. Should be good.
And just so other people are aware, Spencer, I believe you're going to want to have your deck list for that tournament made as well, I assume.
Yeah, yeah. We're gonna do deck lists. I'll if you want to just people can just message me that for a Moxfield link as well. It's mostly just to do a points check, but there will be a deck list roundup, so be aware.
And just for our esteemed viewers, we will be attempting to record some of the top 8 at the very least of this tournament, and maybe doing some voiceover content of some of the final 8 matches as well.
Yeehaw.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for listening. Thanks to my esteemed co-hosts, and have a great weekend, and talk to you hopefully soon.